Participants, thank you very much. Everyone, as Kat has said, our panel is named Memory as Form of Justice, and we will talk about the transformation in the memory during the time of the full-scale invasion, memorying as resistance to forgetting, to destruction, and what we all can do to gain the justice. It's something that depends on us and something we should never refuse. Before we start, let me introduce our wonderful speakers, Mykola Humenyuk, head of the regional branch of Sociological Association of Ukraine, also of Monuments and Territory, Military Memorials, in the Russian-occupied part of Ukraine. Sergei Dichenko, museum specialist and local historian, and Svetlana Osipchuk, director of the Museum of War Childhood in Ukraine. Let's start. Let me start by asking you how the memory practice is transformed during the time of the full-scale invasion, how this network of the professionals who work with the memorialization have changed, how the inquiry to the memory practice has changed during this period, because there are a lot of tendencies and I hope you will tell us about them. We'll remember, like in 2022 we were all documenting everything we could reach. In 2023, 2024 there was a big inquiry into this spontaneous realization of the places, and obviously there are much more of these tendencies and transformations and inquiries of about where we are at this timeline. Who would like to start? Let me start. First of all, I'm here as a sociologist who has done dozens of researches in Kherson region and in Ukraine, and there is a Protection Foundation, New Generation, and other foundations. Together we did a lot of research work. And what can I say about the inquiry, how it changed? What is now the inquiry for commemoration in Kherson region and in Ukraine? The inquiry number one is tactical. It's an inquiry for instant memorialization connected with dramatic experience. So if we are speaking of Kherson, there was a wave of renaming, but all the time Kherson administration received letters with the propositions to rename the streets, to create the memorials, and a lot of things has been done already, and this is an inquiry for a tactical instant memorialization connected with dramatic experience. It exists and it's the most powerful because unfortunately there are more and more victims. The second inquiry, it exists and it slows down a little bit, but it's not that that definitive in Kherson region, but some people want uncomfortable, so-called uncomfortable memory to be removed from public space. Something this is not in line with dehumanization, decolonization. Third inquiry, third need is in hybridization of memory, or about how this memory about this war is connected with the memory about the Second World War, and this inquiry exists especially at the periphery and in the villages. And the third inquiry, which is not articulated in the media and is absent at the public field, is the inquiry for the pause. During math research and qualitative research, many times I heard this idea that for sure this war shouldn't be forgotten. We need commemoration events, but we have to wait at the moment. We have to rethink everything that happens. And this inquiry resonates with a lot of people who are not very active in media. But the people, they have this inquiry, and it's one of the most powerful. Thank you very much for this introduction, Mikola. And for sure we will speak again about the questions of about so-called uncomfortable memory, ours or someone else's. And I very would like to thank you for this possibility of pause, because pause is necessary for any serious conversation. It's not about a lack of desire to reflect on or to remember. It's about the necessity to take time and to reflect what has been spoken already. And it's very important, and it's a pity we don't talk about it enough in the professional and intellectual field. Sergei? I am very grateful to Mikola. He had more of a sociological approach. Yes, it's very interesting. We can create something at the intersection of optics. Right. This attempt to change something very quickly and to put a monument to memorize about some effects that took place. Yes, it exists. In Kherson, it's currently paused because of the conditions under which the country continue living under the constant shelling. But even without that, when I was visiting the lilac garden in Kherson, I was so touched. I wouldn't do anything else there if we are talking about some kind of memorialization. It's already very impressive. We started working in Odessa with Oksana Dovgopolova, who is the curator of the platform the past and the art, and she's working with the problem of memorialization. And of course we need artists, and we need maybe some paradoxical point of view to make sure we do not recreate it in a very direct way. In this case, yeah, we do need to have this pause. And there is a need. Sometimes they say that there is a need to rethink something in 25 years. We will not say how many years exactly is needed, but the pause is important. About the change of attitude to the heritage, I can say about myself personally. The fourth thing, like the problem of memory, what we should remember or what we shouldn't remember. It's not about the war, it's about decommunization. I think a lot of things changed, and we realized that when we are documenting the destroyed heritage in Kherson region, we realized that how few heritage objects are left there in Kherson region. This is first thing. The second thing, most of them were actually destroyed before the war, not by the enemy, by us. And based on this, I kind of a little bit changed my attitude to the heritage, because we never had this requirement about the preservation of heritage. It's maybe about the lack of understanding of how valuable it is. Yes, we certainly didn't understand the value of this heritage, and now at least I start understanding it, like that There will be no inquiry from the people in the restoration of this heritage because they don't understand the value of this heritage, and we have to start with popularization. We have to start with conversations, with saying that any object of the heritage, first of all, the architecture is the document of history. It's like any other museum object. It's like any written document, which is the evidence of the era it represents. What Russians were doing. I'm not even talking about this war, but about the end, starting from the end of the 18th century. Well, Russians, they do the same thing all the time. Right, you're absolutely right. And we started doing the same thing they taught us to do during the last 70 years of Soviet reign. Dehumanization should be in the mindset, not in removing some inscriptions from the buildings. Yes, and that's why we are talking about this inquiry to the memory. And I think this is it, and then we will discuss it further. Thank you very much, Sergei. We will definitely talk about the expeditions. I think it's a very important optics to look at the cultural heritage in the field of memory. Now we are forming what is going to be the history in the future. Svetlana? Let me add one more thing. I will tell from the standpoint of the institution, which is dealing with documenting of the experience of children for 7 years, and we started it before the full-scale invasion, and we continue working in this field. And the second perspective is that in our case, documenting is the conversations with people. They're underage, those are teenagers, young people whose childhood at some point was crossed by the war. So those are teenagers from all over the Ukraine. So it's like non-material heritage, if I may say so. I would add another requirement. Today it's 2025, and as we know from the metaphor of the Yale Symposium, our war is the most documented war. Yes, the Yale Symposium done by the Center of Urban History in Lviv. Yes, right. And that's from the very beginning of the war, the documenting was done by different institutions, activists, people, networks, etc. Now, on the fourth year of war, we have entered the period when for many institutions and people the time have come to think like what we should do about what has been documented already. How do we make sure it is consistent? What do we do with it, and what will be the future of the archives that we have created already, and how we're going to continue doing that? Like, it's about a lot of questions, starting with some initiatives that we're doing it in the first years of full-scale invasion, do not have the possibility to continue doing it. The second dimension is that people is also a resource which is not endless, and the totality of war experience for us is very exhausting. No one is able to recover completely, even if you have some time and place to recover. So it's a very difficult strategic question. How do we support the sustainability of these processes? Yes, how can we build stability and sustainability? It's a big question, because I think all of you know such initiatives that started and they didn't manage, not because they were doing something wrong, but because of the circumstances of war and other things, that it was just impossible to continue this project. And on one hand, it's a natural process, because As we know from the experience of previous wars, not all the archive initiatives survived the war or the first decade, post-war decade. And it's kind of natural on one hand, like that this project has certain waves. On the other hand, like we have to think what we should do with these archives. What do we do to preserve it? And even if the project will be finished sometime soon, the result they got, it should be somehow preserved. Yes, it's about preservation, it's about security of the testimonies and witnesses. Yes, right, because it happens during the ongoing war, and the front line is changing all the time, and everything we collected at some point can be dangerous for the people we were talking to, and any initiative have to think about it, because preserving, like what do we mean preserving? If it's preserved but it's just kept somewhere, yes, who has to have access to it? How can we grant this access is safe and ethical? Right, and that this archive, whether material or non-material, could work on the common target, our future. It's a big question. And I think this is the first point I would like to end. Yes, I would like to say what you said about this example of archives Mikola mentioned about the tactical horizon of memorialization. Evidently, some things are strategic, and creation of some meta-archive or whatever we call it, it's like an elephant in the room. During this time of full-scale invasion, we're talking about it all the time, so let's talk about it not only at the level of the big archive of the war, but about the intersection of all this layer, tactical and strategical memorialization. Why do you to what, in your opinion, the stakeholders pay more attention? What is in the blank spot field? And I think state is also one of the stakeholders, because for sure they also have the blank spots, and they pay more attention to some things and way less attention to the other things. What do you think about this? Strategic dimension, what we are coping good with, what is still painful. We can talk about it at the level of individual professional, at the level of community, at the level of the state. So, yeah. Let me start with a small introduction. I think we shouldn't forget, when we speak about all these processes and about strategic and tactical dimensions, that we are living in the age of populism, and the culture of memory is always within this field where there is an expectation, there's a certain expectation. The decisions on the memory culture sometimes are taking very fast, and they're not always sustainable in the long term. No, it's not only about long-term sustainability. It's that all these topics of war memorialization are emotionally difficult for all the participants of the process, even for those who represent some state levels, etc. And it's such a general skill that can be not very widespread, and like just being and not trying to get rid of something, trying to solve it somehow. It's overlaps with the need to give a fast result to the stakeholders, to make sure they're not demanding, they're not pressing you, and it creates a certain difficult field of work with this. And there's a war happening around, and Despite working with memories, we are all continue living in the war. Yes, thank you so much, Svetlana. Mykola, yes, I could add. So if we're talking about statical level, it's a level of dialogue, broad dialogue, and the understanding that if we close this wound by granite, it will not stop bleeding. Dialogue, discussion, with the involvement of professionals of different level is a strategic target. This is exactly what we are doing right now. Yes, it's a great, painful, but very great metaphor that it's impossible to cover an open wound with a piece of granite. Sergei, would you like to add something? Yes, I also would like to thank to Mykola for this metaphor. It's it has become a tradition to solve very difficult problems by installing a monument to the heroes of Chernobyl or someone else. And we have lots of stones in our city, but there is no strategic vision in all that. So what Russians are doing at the left bank of Dnieper and what they are doing generally, they replace the notion of cultural heritage with objects of monumental propaganda. They say this is heritage, everything else is not. And it works well because they come, they install it, and they leave. But there is no identity. The identity is being destroyed. It continues to be under destruction, and we understand that this war is not for capturing the territories, it's for destroying the identities. And we have to understand it. So if we manage to conquer it back, if, like speaking about the Great Meadow, if it recreated itself because of what happened during the war, that it becomes a very important object, a heart of Cossack freedom land of freedom, speaking in the imagery language. So any object of identity of our villages in the south is also about the preservation of who we are, and the destruction of our faith works in the favor of the enemy, and this is what exactly they are trying to achieve. I also would like to say that whilst we observe, we're not only documenting the destroyed objects, but the layers of destruction. So under the walls that were destroyed, we can find a lot of layers of the previous histories, some so-called archaeology of destruction. And now it's a possibility to research it in the best way, and what we should do about it further, it's a big question. But I think that some objects that were destroyed, we need to restore them in their previous condition. It may look weird, but we're talking about it in the National Museum of History. We were talking about the post-war recovery of the cities, and there was an example of Warsaw and other Polish cities, whether they had to do it or not, because those are no longer the cultural heritage objects, but some kind of the mock-ups of the cities, how they used to be. I spent a lot of time in Lower Silesia, and right now they are destroying some modern 5-story buildings that were built during the Soviet time in order to rebuild the buildings that were there before the Second World War. And I think it's very important to restore the face of our cities, the faces of our cities. And in Kherson region, it's very diverse. And I would say in Steppe region, it's even more valuable because like there is less of it physically. Thank you very much, Serhiy, especially about this thought about the necessity to preserve the face of our cities, because it's about identity, and this is what this war is for. Like, we are fighting for preserving it. So the example you started to tell us about the international practice, about the restoration of the heritage that hasn't been existent for a certain period of time already. So it's a very interesting question for us. How could we think about the restoration of the heritage that doesn't exist anymore, even within the context of the documenting of the war experience? It's a very interesting topic. Very often this object is no longer there. It stays only on some digital carriers. Getting back to the saying that it's one of the most documented war, like, it's a very valuable memory. It's about identity. There are cities which are no longer there, but we can tell children and other international audiences about what they looked like, what they used to be. What do you think? How do you think? What are the perspectives of post-war restoration of our heritage, not only in Kherson region, but in other places, the heritage that doesn't exist anymore? The perspectives are bad. Well, that's nice to hear, right? Because the recovery projects do not include cultural heritage, as if it's non-existent. This is what we were talking about. This is the aim of the enemy, to make sure that the rebuild is, yes, and cultural heritage is, yes, makes the rebuild challenging sometimes, right? That I lost my thought. So we started documenting with the idea that most likely it will not be recovered, but it's very important moment, detailed documenting. As I said about the archaeology of destroyed walls, this idea came to me on the ruins of our gymnasium at the basis of school number 20, where, as I said, we uncovered the layers that I never thought existed there, that this building used to be even nicer than we know it, than it was after all the continuous repair works after the Second World War. So we have to document each object, and now we are trying to include even the objects that were completely destroyed to the heritage register, the objects in villages where we are documenting. And even if they are not going to be restored, at least we will have them documented, and it will enable research, and the children and young people who will come back and will try to restore their village, they will know about them, and they will be proud of them, and they will be able to say, this is our face. We are unlike other villages because we have this and that. Yes, we're talking about Kherson, we're talking about watermelons and wheat, but even, you know, what the different cities and towns draw normally on their emblems. It's wheat, it's, I don't know, watermelons. Very often it's something agricultural and not some objects of heritage. But it's because they just don't know about them. They don't see anything else apart from watermelon. It's there are a lot of myths that were created in the Soviet time, and before that there was a lot of destruction of Ukrainian identity, and we can talk a lot about it. Like, for example, Crimean Tatars' heritage. It's also our heritage.
Because the territory of the Kherson Oblast was a part of this culture, and it is not different. However, it is Ukrainian, and it is an important detail that now we are digging deeper and trying to explain that Ukraine is not just a region of agriculture. This is primarily about the Kherson region. We were preparing a lecture in the south, and we read it first in Uzhhorod about the urban planning culture in Ukraine, which has existed for centuries. In times of ancient Greece, the urban planning became an art. And this tradition emerged in our territory in the south, and it never went anywhere. It continued. They also tried to deny it, like everyone left the nomad tribes, destroyed everything, and that was it. Actually not, and it can be proven in very simple ways. Because this urban planning tradition cannot change. Even buildings were built in a certain way due to the climate, because the climate dictated what kind of these buildings. That's why we have a lot of words in Ukraine which are actually of a Turkic origin, but still we communicated with people in an area with a high Crimean Tatar population. And the driver said that in Uzbekistan there is no tradition to cover houses in the whitewash, while all houses here are whitewashed. It shows that Crimean Tatars live here. So we are now disregarding and losing this experience of survival in the steppe that cannot be replaced with any outside lifestyle. Roman started speaking about Starodvorivka today and how people come back, how they are forced to come back to these traditions, but those traditions never went anywhere. They lived with that. And these traditions stay in memory, and they can be restored. Thank you, said he. It is actually very interesting and hopeful to speak about a tradition in the context of memory and remembering. And you know, he mentioned Roman, who spoke here in the morning, and I remembered my interview with Roman for a catalogue, and the key metaphor in there was a home that exists even when it no longer exists. And these family homes that Roman spoke about in the morning, that's exactly what this was about. And this importance of preservation of the object that is no longer there is key here. When we spoke about identity, about what our enemy is using against us in the context of memory, I wanted to go deeper in here, and I wanted to speak about approaches that the enemy uses and that we use in the poly memory, when memory as such becomes a target, becomes a weapon and a battlefield. Because you mention that since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Russians have been dedicating a lot of attention to monuments in the occupied territories. This is about appropriating commemoration. It is about painting, as it is often done in Ukraine as well. What does this symbolic colonization mean? Is this about marking the captured space when this is about an area, when it is about a tool of war? Indeed, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the Russians have dedicated a lot of time to memorials. There is the Park of Glory, and there is a flag post where they hung a red Soviet flag, the victory sign. It was removed once by local. It was removed the second time, and then Russians put their. They had this armored vehicle, Tiger. Then they put their armored personnel vehicle, and then they put another military car in there. So an entire unit of soldiers guarded this memorial for months. I think that unit could be useful to them in some other place, but they were actually guarding the flag post over quite a long time. And this kind of emphasizes the importance that was attached by Russians to the memorial, the importance of how Ukraine's practices of memorial resistance were a big part of resistance in the Kherson region. Again, if we look at the history of resistance, there were several moments there. The biggest rally was actually on the day when Kherson was liberated from German fascists, from the Nazis during the Second World War. The memorial in the Lilac Garden was already set up in March, and if you remember, it was very touching. It was a willow, some other tree that was cut down by a shell, and they put in a cross and an icon there with words of dedication. This was the most touching monument that I saw out of all current monuments that exist. And the first forced dispersal of Kherson protests happened when the protesters came to a rally, and they saw that Russians drew over a monument of the ATO soldiers at the Heavenly Hundred. They wrote some insults there, and they started protesting. They were attacked with weapons. This was the first dispersal. This is the Ukrainian dimension, this memorial resistance. And another point that I remember that I have no answer for as of now. Remember, in the Park of Glory, there was this memorial to fighters for independence of all times. And those iconoclastic practices that immediately started being performed in the occupied territories reached it as well. But instead of breaking this monument or throwing it into the river, it ended up in a cemetery. I still don't know who did it. Maybe somebody here knows. I used to visit this monument, and at the beginning of May, it was the 8th of May, I found flowers there. Or there is another story that I heard during an interview with Crimean Tatars in Kherson, that on the day of genocide of Crimean Tatar people, women went to look at a monument in a little park and put flowers there. This was a very small moment of protest, but it was there and was reflected in people's souls and their actions. As for the memorial policy in the occupied territories, you cannot really enumerate all of them. But this includes the destruction of monuments dedicated to the Heavenly Hundred, the ATO.